To talk about money, and I'm Lisa Melton, news editor for Nature Biotechnology, and really today it's quite a privilege to have this panel with us because it is a formidable ecosystem we have gathered on this stage. And if you think about the biotech model of funding, you would start with the funding in academia. Marie Kveiborg from Novo Nordisk Foundation is here to represent what it is that at the early stages, the scientific funding needs to be there so that biotech can be created. Then we have Alex Zhavoronkov, who represents in this ecosystem the CEO and also researcher who is taking these findings out into society, into products. Then we have the corporate investor, Michael Baran from Pfizer Ventures, and who's going to tell us about a slightly non-traditional funding model. So hold on to your hats for that one, because it's going to be interesting. We have Petr Sramek from LongeVC Technology Fund, who represents the institutional investors. I'm going to let Petr tell you a little bit what this is, but this is somehow big money because he's representing funds. So you can explain how it is that you allocate your investments. We have Garri Zmudze. We're going back a little bit into the early stages of funding because Garri invests in pre-seed, seed, and Series A. And we'll hear about some of Garri's very successful investments. And last of all, and I asked Lars Hartenstein to be last. He's from McKinsey Health Institute. And the reason why I asked him to be last is because very few people have overview of the entire aging field. And when we heard this morning that the aging industry could be worth $1 trillion, what would it take for that to materialize? I thought I would ask Lars first what he sees as the main bottlenecks or hurdles for this to happen. Take it away.
It's always helpful to use a microphone as well. So there are two perspectives. There's a perspective inside in this room and there's a perspective outside of this room. I think in this room we all believe in the potential of what we are talking about. And what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about a couple dimensions that are necessary to perhaps mature and drive this field forward so it really would resonate and really increase the number of people that come to this conference and also mobilize more funds for it subsequently. And let me just mention 7. I'll do it very quickly so we can talk about it later and also at the bar and so forth. So number 1 is the perception and the definition of the field. So right now there's sometimes still sensationalist claims and so forth that are about near-term benefits that lead to some skepticism in some quarters. And so how can we have a, appropriately optimistic definition of the field that really then reaches a broader audience and also the right institutions. So number 2 is really advancing the fundamental understanding of aging and how can one come together also globally towards a more, I want to say coordinated, but more a plan on how to do this and how to leverage the resources that are there and also bring back state-of-the-art machine learning and artificial intelligence infrastructures at scale to really advance the field and be, do justice to the potential is. Number 3 is the field of biomarkers. We just heard about it in the previous talks. To come more towards, there are many biomarkers in use. It's too early to really come to a definite consensus on what the right biomarkers are, but how can one establish a dynamic, emerging consensus over time that then obviously needs to be revisited in order to benchmark interventions against each other, as we have just seen, as well as also as surrogate endpoints as we move forward. Number 4, the drug development, getting more hardcore life science expertise, drug development expertise into the field with all the state-of-the-art machine learning, trial designs, and so forth that are being used in many other treatment areas right now that are arguably, going out on a limb there, potentially even more impactful in the healthy longevity field given its complexity. Then next, the whole investment landscape is very different. Still, the risk-loving capital from VCs, high networks, individuals is like 2/3 or something like that of the overall landscape. If you compare that to a more established, still innovative TA, that's about 15%. And if you compare the size of the overall field, it's about, compared to the disease burden, maybe 1/100th or so of what it would be in a more established area. So lots and lots of potential in principle under a few assumptions. And also this point, we looked at a number of biotechs, a sample of biotechs, and on average in the healthy longevity field, the biopharmacos and the institutional life science investors have the majority of those biotechs about 2 years later than in other TAs. So lastly is a talent question. So how do we get to a situation where, let's say, a dean of medical school or so, some of them are here, is actually recommending their most gifted students to go into healthy longevity rather than doing, let's say, neurosurgery to repay their loans. So it's like all these shifts that need to happen in order to help the field to really live up to the potential and mobilize the kind of resources, leadership, attention, and so forth outside of this room that is needed to live up to the kind of potential that we heard in the morning. So I may have gone on a little long, so I'm going to hand up the microphone immediately and happy to follow up at the bar later in the conversation, whatever makes sense. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for mentioning these shifts that need to happen, because this takes me to Marie. I would like to know, within the Novo Nordisk Foundation, which, by the way, is the foundation that owns pharma, so Marie, that's why the investment is in academia and in transnational basic research. Is this shift happening within academia?
So I don't know. I mean, I have no kind of measure for such a change, but what I can say for sure is that that we see proposals for funding in this area. I think it was mentioned just before that we need, in order to kind of promote research and biotech within this area, we need to understand the fundamental molecular mechanisms, the cellular processes that underlie the changes we see with aging. And we have a lot of open call programs, initiatives that support this type of mechanistic studies, and also in the area of aging. So our open calls are bottom up, as I mentioned in my presentation, and of course we have many proposals that lie in this space. We also have a number of kind of initiatives that to promote the mind or change the mindset in young scientists in Denmark mainly, where we kind of have fellowships that are targeted towards translational science, and there you could also easily have projects that are within aging, longevity, and so on. So really, and the next step I would mention is also that we have kind of like an innovation ecosystem built up, where we have grants, individual grants for people who would like to take their basic research discoveries into some sort of translation, either clinic or industry use. And there we have grants to support those kind of proof of concept studies that are needed to get investments for taking it to the next step further down the ecosystem here.
Fabulous. So budding entrepreneurs, up to there you get. Then would come someone like, thank you, someone like Garri. What is it that you're looking for to invest?
Thank you, Lisa. So, you know, since last year when I was on the stage with you, many things changed, and we finalized with our LongeVC first fund, and we started LongeVC 2. This will be a much bigger vehicle in the space, investing slightly later stage as well. And just a month ago, we announced a new initiative that is the NIVC. This is an early stage VC focused on pet longevity. So we're talking about companion animals, cats and dogs, and technologies that actually help pet parents to treat their pets. So when we're talking about companies that we are interested, first of all, we look at the personality of the founder. That's very, very important. And I think this is kind of one of the key decision points, as well as innovation angle, because we really want to invest into new technologies, not just slightly, you know, changing the existing ones. As well as I want to refer to the morning talk keynote of my partner Georg Nabgen, who is here, that we are expecting proper planning for the startups. So they not just live from one fundraising event to another, but it's important to plan all the steps till the very exit. So this is us and what we are looking for in the companies that in our pipeline.
Thank you, Garri. That the planning is a tough call, I suppose, at the outset. Maybe Alex, would you like to share whether you had this master plan at the outset, or how did it go for you?
Well, it went reasonably well now because we raised more than $425 million, and that's usually like bigger than some funds investing in this area. But it wasn't easy. So when we started the company more than 10 years ago, at the same time as the conference, by the way, we started it in Basel, the conference, and the company was started in the US in Baltimore at the Emerging Technology Centers of the Johns Hopkins University. And at that time, I started with my own money and with a few angel VCs, predominantly one VC called Deep Knowledge Ventures. They were very young at the time, and there were very few people who wanted to invest in us. Actually, like, I don't come from, you know, big pharma background or VC background, and my kind of advantage was that we were utilizing deep learning earlier than anybody else, and utilizing deep learning for aging research. So at that time, it was actually very difficult to tell the story. And at that time, we didn't even know what we were doing. So we realized, okay, deep learning for drug discovery and aging research is a good thing. But you kind of don't think about, when you don't have experience going from Series A to Series B to Series C, and having an exit in mind and understanding what you're doing, you think, you know, you can change the world with your tech, and just give me the money and I'll change the world. Turns out it's much more difficult than that. And you get your original money, you build the tech, and then you realize, okay, well, now what do I do? And then you change the business model once, twice, third time. So, and then you figure out that, you know, longevity as a field, longevity drug discovery is very young industry. 10 years ago, it was pretty much non-existent, even though there are many, many failures. And, you know, we've got stories like Certris, we've got stories like Elixir, many companies. Or the best story, of course, Geron, right? So longevity biotechnology is not a new industry at all. They're a company that went public, got to billions of dollars, and then failed or repositioned. So I think that's very important to be sustainable. So if you are a founder who is a serial entrepreneur switching from tech to biotech, you are likely to fail in longevity because it's a very long game. So anything in pharma is a long game. Actually, many of the pharma companies and biotech pharma companies fail because founders get discouraged, or they just find a new shiny thing and they jump, and that's how the company dies. It's very, very important to not only focus on environmental sustainability, but on sustainability of the company. And what we've done, we had to pivot from longevity to dual-purpose targets, dual-purpose therapeutics, and operate within the traditional pharma model. So we stopped making like funny statements that, you know, aging is a disease, let's go after aging is a disease. I made those statements before. We need to change the regulatory lifestyle, regulatory landscape. We decided to, you know, say, okay, well, we're within a traditional paradigm. We like Nature Biotechnology too, as a place to publish. You have to publish in Nature Biotech if you're in biotech. And we published a couple papers there. You have to be within the realm of the pharmaceutical industry. So if you are not within the realm of pharma, if you don't understand how it works, you're going to die. You start developing therapeutics that are targeting diseases and that have a chance to be repurposed for aging. And then you start getting serious investors who actually have a lot of dry powder. But in the early days, I also went into several situations when we had, you know, 3-4 months to live. And the company is running on a dry tank and you don't know what to do. You kind of put all your own money into the company. And at that time, Garri came along and invested in us when we had, like, I don't know, what, 5 months to live, and made good money on us, right? Because then bigger VCs come in, they kind of buy the smaller VCs, that's the cycle of life, they make money, and we started focusing on big pharma. So now we're not positioning ourselves kind of as a purely anti-aging company, no way. But many of the drugs that we have been discovered utilizing aging research. That's kind of the mantra that we're trying to pitch to pharma. Are we now immortal? Not yet. But I think that we are very, very safe. And the investors you've got, my recommendation is get the most credible investors who will take you to the next stage, who actually also learned all the pitfalls and had a lot of failures. My recommendation is to read a few really cool books, like, you know, The $1 Billion Molecule, how Vertex Pharmaceuticals got public, and then there is another follow-up, The Antidote. Read some failure stories. There is a really great book called Merchants of Immortality by Stephen Hall about the history of longevity industry, published in 2004. So it's very important to know what the failures are. And it's also important to know who are the best investors who can take you forward. By the way, Jamie Justice here from XPRIZE brought a bunch of investors with her who have not originally been on a program, otherwise they should have been here. So if you are here, investors, raise your hands. Okay, there is I think they kind of drifted somewhere. But talk to Jamie, she knows only like people with money. So thank you also Hivolution, and inshallah we are going to bring even more money into this field. But I think it's extremely important to make the business very sustainable. So we are selling drugs to pharma. Last year we did $1.5 billion worth of deals. And you want to get to the point where you are kind of cash flow positive before you start making bigger bets. And I think that generative AI nowadays is changing everything. So it's very important to utilize this technology as much as possible, but also be aware that pharma is pharma, and a life cycle of 10 years, you can make it maybe 2 years shorter, 3 years shorter, but you have to move with the speed of traffic. That's why we have clinical trials. So here I would like to pause. I can talk for hours.
So with that, I love this description of the early days, friends and family pitching in. This is quite common across biotech in all the fields. There is a new model, and here's where I'd like to bring Michael in, where potentially there's a lot of people who could be your friends, your investment friends, right?
Yes. Thank you, Lisa. That is true. But I am going to actually pivot a little bit off of this.
Okay.
But I'll mention it quickly. So there's an area called decentralized science, and you may see VitaDAO up here on the right. On the right, third or fourth row down. And this represents a novel way to fund early stage science using blockchain and cryptocurrency. And Pfizer is an early investor in this. And Lisa has written about it in Nature Biotechnology. I encourage you to look up her articles. Yes. So this is phase one of an experiment. You know, it's hard to find capital, right, to finance early stage science. Can you go outside of traditional biotech venture capital to do that, or academic NIH grants or Novo grants? And the answer is yes. I think we succeeded in that experiment because VitaDAO has made over 20 investments. I'll leave it at that, on that comment. I'd like to just make a few comments on this tension that we're kind of talking about here on how do we get to this $1 trillion market, if I could just take a minute. Because I think that's the holy grail, really, is how do we make people live longer? And I feel like there's two kind of business models that have emerged here for how we advance longevity therapeutics. And both have run into a little bit of a brick wall. And since it's the end of the day here, I'll throw out a potential solution that we could consider and talk about. So the two ways that you can move forward are you go direct to consumer, supplement kind of route, or a diagnostic that you hope that a healthcare system or a payer would pick that up. But I think that's the wall we run into today. It's very cool to see that you can reset biological clocks to a younger age phenotype. But is that really going to prevent disease? We don't know that yet. And if I'm a payer, I'm going to say I'm not paying for that test unless I see it's going to take cost off of my top line, right, or bottom line. So that's the problem there, right? We don't have the long studies that show that over 10 plus years, you're really, taking cost out of the system and preventing disease. The other way you could bring pharmaceutical or longevity biopharmaceuticals to market is what Alex just gets at. You pivot, and this is what Pfizer does too, exact same thinking. Age-related disease. So we know these certain diseases where there are FDA pathways to getting drugs approved exist, and that's how we talk about longevity at Pfizer is, but it's really things we're already doing, So, people get more cancer when they're older, people get more cardiovascular disease. I mean, to me, it's a little bit of a cop-out, a little disappointing, because it's just, we're gonna keep doing what we've been doing, and if we can squeeze, a longevity mechanism into our investment thesis, we'll do it. But really, we want to go for extension of life, right? And so, again, you hit the same problem. No one's going to pay for a 10-year study, right? When you have to, if you're a biotech company and you have to go to the venture world, investors want to see a return on their investment. I mean, these funds are 10 years, but really, the sooner the better, and it has to be a 2 to 3x, and you'll get that out of the traditional clinical development pathway. I don't know what the extension of life path yields in terms of ROI. So it's a tough sell to the venture capitalist. So last thing, the solution, I think this is a public health problem. And I think government payers need to step in and maybe say, we're going to subsidize the extension of life study, or we're going to subsidize the early stage of these, what we were just looking at the last talk. We're going to pay for these clinical clock tests and show that we're resetting age. And then the payers will build the database of patients, and they'll be able to tell us in 10 years if it's cutting down specific diseases or not. And I think that's what would really incentivize everyone, is getting public money involved, because I think we've run into a wall on the private side. Although there is investment happening, but I think to get it over the line. So that's my comments.
Thank you for that. And when you say it's a tough sell, Michael, this is where I would like you, Petr, to tell the audience, if they were to come to you and they wanted investment from you, how would they need to sell themselves? What do they, not their souls, but what do they need to show you for you to decide to invest in them?
Yeah, sure. So better to explain, why we do this, why I actually founded or co-founded Longevity Tech Fund 5 years ago. So the mission was to accelerate translation of this amazing science into human clinical applications, right? Not to fund new mouse studies or endpoints where they are not really understandable for general population. Because we actually need much more higher awareness about longevity, about the possibility within the general population, because then it can translate to the more investors, more money flowing into the field, and maybe high interest from politics and that stuff. So we've been looking at companies with that potential, right? So early stage companies, pre-seed, seed, maybe Series A, with the potential to translate into clinic soon. If I mean soon, doesn't mean like next year, but we actually divided companies into 3 groups, like the immediate translation, some simple applications, mid-term translation, like in 3, 4, 5 years, and maybe some longer shots, but with a great promise, like 10 years human tissue replacement and so on. So we invested in 47 companies, so we have a portfolio of 47 portfolio companies. But we're also looking at diversification between subfields. You can imagine something like aging hallmarks, but it's not exactly aging hallmarks, but we have some like 15 subsegments where we are filling these subsegments with solutions on these 3 timelines. So we are always looking to get some comprehensive portfolio of solution, because we actually believe that the final solution of kind of a real rejuvenation or maybe a reversing phenotype by 10, 20 years will not lie in a single intervention or like a small set, but it will be personalized combination of various interventions. So we are filling these subsegments or subsectors, and that's basically our main selection criteria. So, for example, we really have 4 companies in mitochondria space. Mitochondria is one of the maybe one of the most impactful subfields. Exactly in these 3 timelines. So we are not going probably to invest in another mitochondria company, but we are looking for like extracellular matrix solutions, right? Or some other not really covered fields. So these are all criteria.
Very interesting, thank you. And with that, the floor is open to all of you. And I would like to be able to bring in a lot of questions in a very short while, and for that I need your help, please. If you could phrase them as questions rather than comments, and who you'd like that question to go to, please. Yeah?
Keep it safe. In terms of the instruments, what are your thoughts on SAFEs, simple agreements for future equity when you're at seed stage, versus convertible notes?
Yeah, I mean, both works for us. It really depends on the other factors like team composition, IP, and yeah, so that doesn't matter for us.
Well, just a quick answer. We don't do discount-only safes. We do safes with cap.
I have a question for also the ones that fund companies. How important is the team versus the idea?
Okay, so the idea is the first, but not the only important. So we need to see that the idea is sound and fall within some criteria. But the team, there must be definitely a leader in the team. At pre-seed stage, typically there is no capacity to have like a full spectrum team for everything, right? So we need to be tolerant and hope that the team will grow up on the road. But definitely the team leader or the leader who is like behind everything must be in place.
I agree, and I think my example with early investments in Insilico medicine shows this because like it's the business model was changed during the way, and sometimes when we look at the first deck of Insilico, we are smiling because that was a bit naive with all the knowledge that was accumulated since that. But I think this is the most important is the founder and the founding team. and their capability to iterate the product and find the market fit. So I think that that's the key for us, at the early stage, of course.
Thanks. So the comment about the sort of going after age-related diseases is kind of a distraction, right? We're trying to, so to Michael, to your point, I think, you know, or to everyone's point about this $1 trillion unlock, right? So how do we get there? What is the biggest bottleneck? And Michael, you talked about getting the payers involved, right? Because ultimately we need a label, right? And once the label is there, all the companies can then go directly to aging. How do we do that? How do we get payers engaged?
I think you need data, right? So someone needs to run a 10-year plus clinical trial. I mean, there's one that we talk about often, right, with metformin, I think, but I don't think it's recruiting. Why? Yeah, it's not recruiting because, you know, the financial ROI probably isn't there. It's to attract capital. So I think that's what I was getting at, is really, I think we've run into a wall with trying to get private institutional money to fund one of these studies.
But so you think the trial should be done? It's the problem is who's going to fund it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just to add, right now doing a trial on rapamycin or metformin, it's not economically feasible. Those are generics. They're off patent. And those are actually the most, like rapamycin, the most promising drug. By the way, Pfizer's. Rapamune, great drug. Nobody's going to do a trial because it's generic. So it's very, very important to actually go after a real disease, get a drug approved, get the proper biomarkers, and then try to repurpose. So try to recreate the rapamycin scenario one more time, but in this case, with proper patent life, you've got 18 years or 15 years down the road of patent life, and you already approved the drug for one indication, and then you go multi-indications. Great example is TYK2 inhibitors from Nimbus Therapeutics that was acquired by Takeda last year for $6 billion, $4 billion upfront after a phase 2 trial. And you ask Takeda, why did you do that, right? Like, why? TYK2, those are like ancient targets. My grandmother was working on them. And they started 16 or like 14 to 16 clinical trials, many combos for chronic conditions that you will go on to, just like on GLP-1s, right? You're staying there for the entire life. It's more or less safe. You can milk this drug for a long time for a lot of money. The idea is to get something like that, but super age-related and super implicated in aging. I currently actually don't see a lot of companies that have that at this point. I actually look at mine and I'm like, oh, wow, I'm here. And look at BioAge and they in-license some compounds. Mine is like novel chemistry. But also great model, right? So you need to, like, I think BioAge model is currently like very good because you find a good target, go for a specific pathway, repurpose, get the drug approved, then you can try to go after your own chemistry. Like my pathway to chemistry, if I were to do it all over again, I wouldn't do my own chemistry. It's like dramatically, it's like hell. It's like, you know, launching rockets into space. But right now, I think I probably outperform Pfizer in terms of R&D productivity as a company. In terms of small molecule, new preclinical candidates, I can do like 12 a year.
The paper was impressive.
Speed. Yeah, well, the speed, but now I'm limited by capital, right? So give me more money, I'll get more drugs. That's why I want to give more countries this capability.
So just a small bit, because your question in some ways is the question that we're all struggling with. Like, how can this large market emerge? And I fully agree. If there's magical data somewhere, everything follows the data. That's clear. But in the absence of waiting for that, I think the point, I'm not going to repeat what I said earlier, but there are many things that hang together. And I think ideally quite a few things need to happen at the same time. So for example, in order to get this kind of new money, and that you talked about, Michael, from public sources or wherever, for example, the field perception does play a role to make it easier for these new sources of funders to emerge, right? So there's work to do, I think, on a couple dimensions in order to move the field ahead and to be able to capture that kind of potential that was, I think, outlined in a couple of other talks.
So one more question, yeah? I think, yeah, and that will be it, yes.
Yeah.
You and you, yeah.
I have a question. I'm coming from the more traditional biotech drug discovery background, medicine, all that kind of stuff. And I just like to understand how the agent research it works, basically, because in traditional biotech drug discovery, you have an endpoint, which is FDA regulated, for example. You meet the endpoint, you get score at clinical trial, and then you get investment and all that kind of stuff. And this model works, it's understandable. If in the agent research, we still don't have the very specific clinical endpoint, it's still kind of work in progress, how it all works as a business model from the venture capital standpoint when you don't have FDA approved target to basically, I mean, not biological target, but endpoint target to drug, but you still need to raise capital to do some stuff. So based on the example of Insilico medicine, I understand that you have to pivot to traditional and then raise money, have resources, and basically come back to agent. But if, let's say, this is not the case, is it
What's
the
your
path?
question? Just, yeah.
Yeah, so the question, how to develop drugs that are targeting agent from scratch and not through the traditional path?
Thank you.
Can I answer that for just 1 second and 1 sentence? If the drug is powerful enough to modulate aging, it will work in multiple diseases, period. And I just name one that works on aging and doesn't work on a disease. So just pick the drug that works on aging and then purpose it to the right disease. That's, sorry, I just had to say that. Yeah. But by the way, this guy is very, very powerful. He runs like top 5 biotech analytical companies in the world.
Great.
Thank you.
So did we have one more question? Yes. Are you? Yeah.
Please.
Very, very brief.
He also
yeah,
answered
sure,
Pfizer,
sure, sure.
right?
Of course. Okay.
I would just say, I live primarily in the non-longevity biotech venture capital world, and we struggle with this. And that's why you see when there's a longevity mechanism, it's usually financed and valued off of whatever the age-related disease it's associated with, because that's what people understand, and that's what's going to actually generate and value the asset in the near term. So as far as how you make the case for a pure longevity play, I would pass it to these two. But in my experience with Pfizer and the things that we get involved with, we always pivot to age-related disease, and then it's just, it's not really much different than any biotech company working on a non-longevity mechanism of action.
There's one, two, and then we'll say goodnight. Yeah.
I just want to make a comment, and I'd like a comment from the panel.
A question.
But it's primarily directed to Michael. The industry would look very different if Restore Bio had hit, or Elixir had hit. So 2 things that would create a rush of money, I would think, is clinical success, phase 3 or NDA or what have you, and a takeout, a big takeout. Pharma buys one of the longevity companies. So I guess we're waiting for that to happen, but I think I'm looking for the late-stage clinical successes, because that's the default. If any of those hit, I would imagine that it opened up the floodgates.
That's what's going to happen. Like BioAge, right, is in obesity. I mean, if that works, Apelin, right, it'll be a big bio, and then you'll have that. And by the way, Thomas hosted the longest panel I've ever been a part of, 2-hour panel discussion. So if you're getting ready for drinks, don't let this guy near the moderator.
Fair enough.
Good to see you.
Okay. Yeah.
I guess this question is for Alex, but for everyone in the panel. There is a huge gap in knowledge between preclinical and early-stage clinical data. Can we use things like Insilico and other types of AI to improve how we can predict early-stage clinical data, or are you going to fly blindly, as we've been?
So you can get very accurate. So we built models that are capable of really, really, really good insights. But at the end of the day, you have to do the experiments. So without the experiment, you won't be able to, get IND clearance, right? So for that, you need to have the entire preclinical package plus, GLP talks. So what we are trying to do now, and now we have 18 preclinical candidates that I can talk about. So lots of experience going from 0 to preclinical candidate, and then you take like 9 months to do IND enabling studies, and you get IND clearance now 9 programs are IND enabled, and some are in human clinical trials. So I can tell you that we are probably like the best in this field. I don't know a better company, right, in terms of prediction of translation, but you still need to have the experiment, and very often you are wrong. And you're going to be wrong in dose, you're going to be wrong in PK. PK, very difficult. So actually, if your guys are like from crypto space or some like dysregulated, whatever, unregulated things, right now my bottleneck, I need to get human PK after preclinical candidate nomination. Beautiful. If I do that, I can save another 9 months. And I know in some companies, in some countries that are not exactly great at drug discovery, you can get some patients in a hotel, dose them, get the quick PK, but those are like old targets that are fast following, like Lilly, Pfizer, etc. So somewhere people are doing that. I'm not allowed to do that from ethical or legal perspective. If some country allows to get quick, just like my non-GLP tox is 28-day non-GLP tox. Usually it's like very high quality. Most companies do like 7 or 14. My data package is usually very high quality. But if I could get quicker human PK and also look at all the metabolites very quickly, that would be very, very beautiful. That is one of the big problems to get that quickly. You won't be able to get that quickly before phase 1 clinical trial. And then once the clinical trial is running, it's very difficult to modify it, right? So whatever you can do early, experimentally, you should. And then you need to learn how to love the FDA. You know, when I when I got into this field, I thought, okay, regulated industry, FDA, bad guys. I even like wrote about it in my book. Hugely regret it. Those guys are my heroes. The FDA is one of the most efficient organizations on the planet. You send them something that have to respond within a certain amount of time. They're on your side, but they are there for a good reason. And AI currently is super powerful, but without the experiment, you actually like 20% of the time you're wrong, for example. You're wrong, you're going to hurt people. You don't want to hurt people, you want to ensure that the experiments are there.
Great, and with that, sorry.
One final question.
Yeah, final question.
As a biotech company, we always hear that, okay, we should license our drug in order to make money in a short period of time or as soon as possible. But how do you do that in a drug that you are going to use for different indications? So this is a challenge, because if I license my drug for Alzheimer's to you, and later on I can use this same drug for cancer, right? How do I do different deals? I mean, this could be a conflict for off-label indications. So how do you do this?
I wouldn't do that. Some people go down that route. Have you done that? Or
No, pharma doesn't do that. They like don't pay a lot of money for like an indication. They just don't do that.
No. I mean, because the reason is, if you like a pharma might buy the whole asset, right? They want to have full control over the asset. And if someone else is running a clinical trial on a different indication and they run into some safety signal or something like that, it just kills the whole asset story or brings you a lot of trouble that you don't necessarily want. And so it's much cleaner if no one else controls any of the other indications. So. Yeah, and then the other thing that complicates things is the drug pricing, right? Like same mechanism, different indications, all will have different price. And strategically, if you go forward first, you're going to set a floor or a ceiling, I guess, for the price, right? And so you're just limiting your flexibility to partner around the asset as a whole, which if you can do it across all indications is much more value. So I would stay away if possible from doing that.
If you find some super magical drug, like some magic that you spread around the graveyard and people start coming up, that's where you start licensing by indication. But unless you have something like that, they would want to have 100% control, even for individual countries. If you say, okay, well, I want to keep the country rights, they're like, nah, cheap, right? Because these guys have a lot of choice and nothing works.
So with that, remember, all the panelists, go to the bar and ask them all the questions you ever wanted to ask. And thank you so much for being here and help me.